When the Rebel Alliance became a big enough force to challenge the Empire, they relied heavily upon the idealism of hope and a better galaxy. In many cases, the Rebels looked up to Jedi such as Luke to symbols of that hope. Even the Rebel Alliance insignia is derived from the crest of the Jedi Order. So with all of this pro-Jedi sentiment from the Rebel Alliance, why didn't Yoda join the rebellion and lead them against the Empire? Hello again, Acolytes, and welcome to the Archives. The question of Yoda's involvement, or rather the lack thereof in the Galactic Civil War, isn't something that's frequently brought up. However, when we consider who Yoda is, it would only make sense that he would rise from the ashes of the Old Republic to lead this group of freedom fighters towards a better future, much like his predecessor Vandar Tok'er did, and would do after the first Jedi Purge back in the days of Darth Nihilus. But despite all of Yoda's experience as a general in the Clone War and the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, he never bothered to come out of hiding to lead the rebellion or get involved in any capacity. To some, this may seem cowardly and just another one of Yoda's many mistakes. However, when we actually dive into his reasoning, there is definitely wisdom in his decision to stay out of the conflict. So join us today as we open a holocron and discuss exactly why Yoda refused to join the Rebel Alliance. When it came to Yoda's decision to stay completely hidden and away from society in the galaxy, this comes from several places in his heart. The first, and unfortunately the most prominent place, is a place of shame. Yoda spent a lot of his time alone on Dagobah meditating upon his mistakes from the Clone Wars and beforehand. He had a lot of time to think about how and why the Sith were able to rise right under his nose and destroy the Republic as he knew it. According to the canon Yoda comics, the Old Master would carry an immense guilt all the way until Luke arrived on the Swamp World. Yoda felt that he had become old and foolish, blind to the dark side, deeming himself not any help to the greater rebellion. It was his responsibility to uphold the Jedi, to uphold their morals, to uphold the Republic, and he failed. Yoda shouldered the blame on himself for each and every Jedi that died during the war, and those who fell to the dark side haunted him even further. Yoda hated himself for failing Dooku and Anakin, allowing Padme to die, for not seeing the manipulation of the Senate, and how the war was stretching the Jedi thin. He believed that had he gotten involved with the galaxy now, his foolishness would only ruin things for the rebellion. But he would go through much character development and change within his time in exile, and he learned to let go of his shame and realized that there was nothing he could have done to change and make the situation any different. The war was lost before it began. Yoda knew that it wasn't his place to return to the fight though, and especially against the Empire and the Sith as they triumphed, as both he and Kenobi had decided what they need to do was live and to train the next generation of Jedi to overtake the darkness. The old ways would no longer do. But this brings us to our next point. Why did Yoda decide to go into exile instead of spending the next 20 years training any resistance force or Jedi, or even more? How come he didn't try to hone his skills in the Force and to sneak his way into the Imperial Palace to face off against Sidious and Vader? That would be because while the Sith were growing stronger, Yoda was growing weaker and he could sense it. He understood that he had become far too old to continue fighting, approaching 900 years. All of this accumulated knowledge of the Force wasn't enough to stop Sidious during their fight in the Senate, and no matter how much Yoda trained, he had come to the understanding that Palpatine and Vader were growing too rapidly in the dark side. In the canon Yoda series, the Master even says this: "Know about it, I do. Stop it, I cannot. The Empire, the dark side, Vader, the Emperor, become too powerful they have. The threat has become too big for me to defeat." At this stage in life, Yoda was incredibly wise, but he was reaching his physical limits. While the Force can carry one's body beyond those limits, Yoda's ability to call upon it and keep it flowing through him was getting smaller and smaller. The war had aged the Grand Master even further. The comics show Yoda having difficulty moving around in order to hunt on Dagobah, leaving him to give up eating meat and start a root and leaf diet. Even Obi-Wan Kenobi would mention that he was getting too old for the sort of thing, such as delivering R2-D2 to Alderaan with the Death Star plans, stating that he too was growing weaker. This was when he had no idea he would even have to board the Death Star. It's a hard pill to swallow at this age, as it's a legitimate reason why the two Jedi did not want to directly get involved. As the last real Jedi Masters around who carried with them the code, spirit, and teachings of the Order, their lives were extremely valuable. Too valuable to be put on the front lines of a war, and they needed to stay alive to train Luke and Leia when the Force told them that it was time. There were no longer hundreds of Jedi Masters to train the next generation. There were 2. Even if Yoda had the capability to defeat Sidious, he believed that the galaxy had moved on from him and the old Jedi way. The Revenge of the Sith novelization does a lot of explanation on Yoda's thought process while he was battling the Emperor. It talks about how he realized that despite being a beacon of light for the Jedi and the scourge of the dark side, Yoda just didn't have it within him anymore. In fact, Yoda realized that he never had it at all. He had lost the war against the Sith before he had ever even been born. Back when the Rule of Two was instated, the Jedi began the loss. The Sith evolved and changed, far beyond what the Jedi had been prepared to fight. They had changed the galaxy with them too, and left the Jedi behind. This was the critical moment when Yoda realized that Sidious wasn't fighting for him and the soul of the galaxy, but the horrific realization that Sidious was fighting Yoda, purely based off of his own amusement and a challenge. Sidious was enjoying himself while fighting the Grand Master because he had wanted to for so long, not because anything was really on the line. The Empire was already too strong, and the entire galaxy had turned against the Jedi. When we consider Yoda's feelings on this matter, when he had spent his entire life as a Jedi trying to protect the galaxy that now hated him, it would be very difficult to convince him that the Rebel Alliance would change from that perspective. Yoda knew that the Jedi Order had to change, and that would mean that he needed to decrease and quietly fade away while someone else was allowed to rebuild it, to become what the galaxy needed. While the negative feelings of shame, fear, and inadequacy had a big hand in his decision, at the end of it all, Yoda overcame these emotions and instead made his choice out of a place of profound humility. If Yoda had insisted on getting involved in the war, believing that he had the ability to change the galaxy on his own and based off of his leadership and power, then he would have learned nothing from the downfall of the Jedi. He would still believe that their ways were the right ways and that they could triumph if they stuck to their guns. But no. Yoda understood that the Jedi needed to change, and that couldn't happen if he remained in charge. All he could do was pass on his teachings and hope to the next generation, and hope that they would become the Jedi that the galaxy deserved and that they needed. In conclusion, Yoda started his journey in cowardice, but ended in humility and wisdom. Could the rebellion have used an experienced Jedi general? Of course it could have. But in the end, nothing would have changed. The galaxy would have been put back on the endless looping cycle that it had been in for thousands of years. It was the will of the Force for the Jedi to be humbled and to change so that the balance could be restored. But anyway, my friends, this is why Yoda decided to stay out of the Galactic Civil War. We definitely want to know your thoughts on the matter, and your thoughts on Yoda's decision. Do you think Yoda should have joined the rebellion anyway? Or could this have ended in disaster, and Yoda or Kenobi being murdered, and the Jedi destroyed forever? What are your thoughts on this explanation? And as always, my friends, thank you so much for visiting the channel and the archives today, and may the Force be with you always.